Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Did God create humanity, or did humanity create God? Today we are going on a fascinating journey through human history to uncover the sociological and economic origins of religion. We'll explore how primitive tribes invented the concept of the soul, why the first gods were female, how the agricultural revolution led to human sacrifice, and the hidden historical truths behind the myths of Abraham, the Garden of Eden, and the Great Flood.
Yeah, we are really getting into it today. We're looking at Byron Esenolu's book, The Mystery of Religions.
Exactly. And our mission for this deep dive is to strip away the supernatural elements for a bit and look impartially at the material origins of faith. We're looking at this strictly from an anthropological lens, exploring how our ancestors' changing environments and economics shaped their beliefs.
Right. The author treats human belief systems almost like a living fossil record.
And just to be super clear, we aren't taking any sides here. We're just reporting on the fascinating ideas in the source material to see how early survival engineered the divine. Also, if you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button.
So to start, the author rewinds the clock way back, like Paleolithic era. He uses some older anthropological terms from Lewis Henry Morgan, calling this earliest stage savagery.
Which sounds intense.
I know, but the main point is that humans in this stage simply did not have gods at all.
They didn't even have the cognitive ability to separate themselves from nature yet, right?
Exactly. You can't worship a creator if you don't even see yourself as distinct from the forest you live in.
So where does it start? Because the text points to a really specific, almost surprising trigger for the invention of the soul.
The incest taboo.
Yeah, which is it's a massive psychological shift.
It really is. Before this taboo, early human bands didn't have these strict reproductive boundaries. When the taboo was introduced, it was a massive shock to human psychology.
Because it created a split.
Yes. For the very first time, you have the biological desire of the individual colliding head-on with a rigid rule of the tribe.
Right, this internal friction.
That friction is the crucible for the dual self. You have a physical body that wants to act, and this new internalized societal rule screaming, no.
And to early humans, they didn't have psychology degrees.
No, of course not.
So they didn't think of it as an abstract mental conflict. They felt like there was literally a second invisible entity living inside them, a ruler dictating their desires.
And that split consciousness right there is the dawn of the concept of the soul.
Which is wild. And they thought this soul was extremely physical, right? The text cites anthropologist J.G. Fraser on this.
Oh yeah, Fraser's field examples are amazing. Early humans didn't think of the soul as a ghost. They thought it was a tiny physical replica of the person living inside the body.
And it could just fall out.
Literally fly away.
Yeah.
Fraser documented rituals and celebs where if someone was sick, the community would attach actual fish hooks to the person's nose and navel.
Fish hooks? To catch the soul.
To catch the soul. Because the logic was perfectly sound to them. If the soul is trying to escape the dying body, you have to physically hook it.
I think he also mentioned they would plug up keyholes.
Yeah, during childbirth, they would meticulously plug every keyhole and crack in the house, or tie the mouths of their animals shut.
Just terrified the new baby's soul would fly out the window or get swallowed by a dog.
Exactly. It's a very localized, physical animism. And this logic extended outward to the whole community. Which brings us to the totem.
Okay, yes. Let's talk about the totem, because I feel like pop culture gets this completely wrong.
Totally. People think a totem is an early god, but the text clarifies it wasn't a god at all. It was a collective soul.
Representing the community itself.
Right. Whether it was an eagle or a kangaroo or a specific tree, it embodied the rules binding the tribe together. And because of that, it was strictly taboo to harm or eat it.
Except, and here's the crazy part, except for these vital ceremonies called Intichiuma festivals.
Yes. Once or twice a year, the whole community gathers to deliberately break the taboo.
They ritually sacrifice and eat the totem.
They do. And the logic there is that by eating the physical representation of the collective soul, you are absorbing its power.
You're reuniting with the community's core identity.
Exactly.
And when you strip away thousands of years of theology, you're looking at the exact Paleolithic blueprint for modern communion rituals.
It is an unbroken chain.
Eating the flesh and drinking the blood of a sacred figure to absorb divinity. Like the Christian Eucharist, it traces right back to those early hunter-gatherer totem feasts.
It's a straight sociological line. Now, as societies grew and started projecting these spirits outward onto the forces of nature, we finally get actual gods.
The very first ones were completely female.
Uniformly female.
Why? I mean, the text links this directly to biology and survival, right?
Yeah, in early hunter-gatherer life, the mechanics of biological paternity were completely unknown.
Men just didn't know they played a role in reproduction.
Right. But maternity was undeniable. It was the visible center of survival. Women were the source of new life, just like the earth was the visible source of plants and food.
So society was inherently matriarchal.
And their cosmology reflected that. When they imagined the chaotic, life-giving forces of the universe, they naturally envisioned them as a mother.
The text gives that great example of the goddess Isis.
From around 150 AD, yeah. She famously declared herself the firstborn of the world and the universal mother.
She pointed out she was worshipped everywhere under different names: Minerva, Venus, Ceres.
From the Mediterranean to the Indus Valley, the earliest artifacts we find are almost always female figures, pregnant or holding their breasts, an all-nurturing Earth Mother.
Long before anyone ever thought of a male sky god.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because that matriarchy collapses violently. The text calls this transition Middle Barbarism.
And the catalyst wasn't spiritual, it was entirely economic.
The domestication of animals.
Figuring out how to herd and breed livestock rewired everything. Men went from hunters to herdsmen. For the first time, you have massive surplus wealth.
Herds of cattle and sheep.
Right, wealth that existed totally outside the female gathering economy. Plus, by breeding animals, men finally figured out how biological reproduction worked.
They realized they had a role.
And suddenly, they have immense economic power, and they want to pass this private property down to their own guaranteed biological heirs.
Enter the patriarchy.
The religious myths evolved immediately to mirror the economics. Suddenly, the ancient texts are full of male sky god Zeus, Marduk violently subjugating the earth goddesses.
Like male heroes slaying female dragons.
It's a direct mythological encoding of patriarchal herdsmen conquering the older matriarchal order.
And to protect this new wealth, the chiefs invent something else, the true origin of taboo.
Yes. In the old system, the totem protected everyone equally. But now, taboo acts like a spiritual electric fence around the chief's private property.
It wasn't about moral purity at all.
Not at all. It was a law enforced by the threat of divine wrath. Touch the elite's surplus wealth, and the gods will strike you down.
But with agriculture and animal domestication comes a really dark turn. The institutionalization of human sacrifice.
It's easy to look at human sacrifice as just a bizarre spiritual anomaly, but the author grounds it heavily in ecology.
The numbers in the text are just staggering. Like, explorers documenting the Aztec civilization counted 136,000 human skulls on their temple crossbeams.
136,000. To understand the Aztecs sociologically, you have to look at their environment. Mesoamerica lacked large domesticable beasts of burden, no cows, no sheep.
So as their civilization exploded, they faced severe famine.
Without livestock, the state used human sacrifice as a highly systematic method of population control. And frankly, in an environment lacking large mammals, it functioned as a protein source for the elite.
So feeding the sun god with human blood was just the ideological cover for an ecological crisis.
Absolutely.
And it wasn't just the Americas. In the Old World, during the fragile early stages of agriculture, human sacrifice was everywhere.
The gods like Moloch or Baal.
Right, they were routinely offered human lives, specifically the firstborn child.
Which, in a patriarchal society, was your ultimate heir and most valuable possession. Offering your son during a famine was the ultimate desperate transaction to buy back favorable weather.
Which brings us to a mind-blowing rereading of the prophet Abraham.
This is one of the best parts of the text.
Everyone knows this story. God tests Abraham by commanding him to sacrifice his son Isaac. Abraham goes to do it, but at the last second, God intervenes.
He provides a ram caught in a thicket to take the boy's place.
The author argues this is not just a story about unquestioning faith. It marks a massive macroeconomic milestone.
Abraham represents the era of the successful nomadic herdsman.
And the ram replacing the child.
It symbolizes the exact historical pivot point when domesticated livestock finally became plentiful enough to replace human children on the sacrificial altar.
It is humanity encoding a new economic reality. We finally have enough sheep, we can stop slaughtering our kids to appease the weather.
The myth literally consecrates the end of human sacrifice, enabled entirely by animal husbandry.
That is just brilliant. So, from the herdsman, the text moves us into Mesopotamia, the first city-states.
The Sumerians, They had to build these massive irrigation canals between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers.
which requires immense centralized labor, which means you need a central authority.
Enter the temple. The temple was effectively the first central bank.
And the local god was the chief capitalist.
Precisely. The god technically owned all the land, the grain, the canals. The priests were just his earthly managers.
So polytheism made total economic sense.
Every city-state had its own independent economy, so every city had its own independent god.
And if two cities fought over water rights.
To the citizens, it was their respective gods doing battle in the heavens.
So how do we get to monotheism? How do we go from dozens of city gods to one single all-powerful god?
The author ties that directly to imperialism and global trade.
Right, because these independent Mesopotamian cities get conquered by massive empires, the Assyrians, the Babylonians.
And their local gods suddenly looked very powerless. At the same time, you have the invention of currency and massive trade networks.
Bringing in the terrifying laws of supply and demand.
A farmer could do everything right, appease his local god, and still starve because a market crash hundreds of miles away devalued his grain.
These invisible market forces and distant emperors created this feeling of inescapable fate.
Exactly. Millions of people were suddenly being ruled by one distant supreme emperor.
So the heavens had to reflect that.
There must be one supreme, distant God dictating the universal laws of the cosmos.
The Israelite prophets pioneered this. They were geographically trapped between these warring super empires.
Right. They reasoned if earthly kings were brutal and temporary, there must be an ultimate king of kings above it all.
Which leads right into the foundational myths of the Abrahamic texts, the
Yes.
Bible, the Quran. The author traces these directly back to Sumerian origins.
It's fascinating how these sacred narratives are just adaptations of ancient Mesopotamian reality.
Take the concept of creation from clay. God molding man from mud.
Yeah.
The text argues that isn't a random metaphor.
It's a direct mirror of the most revolutionary technology of the Sumerian era.
The potter's wheel.
In the older Sumerian myths, the god Enki tells the mother goddess to mold humanity from clay, specifically to be agricultural laborers for the divine elite.
So while texts claim God created man in his image,
Historically speaking, man created God in the image of a master potter.
man. Okay, let's talk about Eve's rib because this blew my mind. The rib problem in Genesis.
Ooh, the translation error.
Yes. Women being created from Adam's rib has shaped gender dynamics for thousands of years. But the text reveals it's just a massive historical mistranslation of a Sumerian pun.
It really changes everything. In the original Sumerian myth, the god Enki gets sick in 8 of his organs, including his rib.
To cure him, the mother goddess makes 8 specialized healing deities.
And the goddess created to heal his rib was named Ninti.
And in Sumerian, Ninti literally translates to Lady of the Rib.
But the Sumerian word ti also has a second meaning. It means life,
So Ninti equally means Lady of Life.
which is key because the biblical name Eve translates in Hebrew to life, or the mother of all living.
So what happened is, as this myth was passed down over thousands of years and translated by nomadic tribes into Hebrew,
The linguistic dual meaning of the pun was completely lost,
Lady of the Rib and Lady of Life got separated.
leaving us with this incredibly strange literal narrative of a woman being extracted from a man's bone.
Taking it completely out of the supernatural and firmly into ancient translation mechanics.
The author does the exact same thing with the Garden of Eden.
Right, he strips away the magical orchard.
He reinterprets the garden as the lush, relatively egalitarian homelands of the nomadic pastoralist tribes.
Before they migrated down into the Mesopotamian river valleys.
When those free-roaming nomads entered the valleys, they hit the brutal reality of civilization. Hierarchical, class-divided cities where the underclass dug canals from dawn to dusk.
To a nomad, the agricultural city was hell.
In that context, the tree of knowledge of good and evil symbolizes the knowledge of agriculture and statecraft.
Irresistible, but corrupting. Eating the fruit is the irreversible transition from an innocent hunter-gatherer life into the back-breaking world of farming and taxation.
And Adam's curse toiling in the sweat of his brow to extract food from the cursed ground.
It's not magic. It's just an accurate job description for an early farmer.
It's the daily reality of the agricultural revolution.
Which perfectly sets up the final major myth, the Great Flood.
People debate the geological evidence of a global rainstorm all the time.
But the author argues we need to understand the psychology of the Sumerian city dweller.
To them, their walled city was the entire civilized universe. Everything outside those walls was a chaotic, dangerous void.
often personified as a primordial ocean of monsters like Tiamat.
But those monsters were metaphors for the nomadic, barbarian tribes living in the wilderness.
When those tribes inevitably attacked the cities, they didn't just take over, they physically destroyed the infrastructure.
They breached the irrigation dams, burned the temples.
So to a city dweller, when the dams break and the city floods with water and invaders,
It felt like the primordial waters of chaos were literally unmaking the universe.
a localized barbarian invasion was culturally traumatizing enough to be documented as a cosmic, world-ending flood.
And the hero who survives, the Sumerian Zisudra, who eventually evolves into Noah, he represents the remnants of humanity preserving the seeds of civilization.
Starting over once the political and physical waters subside.
Looking at all this, Byron Esinolulu's overarching thesis is profound.
Religion isn't divine magic. It is an incredibly detailed fossil record of our socioeconomic evolution.
Tracing humanity's exact steps. Early hunter-gatherers inventing the soul to manage the incest taboo.
Male herders using the economics of livestock to end human sacrifice.
The builders of the first banking cities turning trade wars into epic battles of monotheistic gods.
And as you pointed out, understanding these texts sociologically doesn't destroy their value for you as a listener.
Not at all. It grounds them in reality. It shows us how deeply our ancestors struggled to make sense of ecological collapse and extreme social inequality.
They lacked the academic language of macroeconomics, so they did what they could. They projected their earthly, material realities into the heavens,
Beautifully put.
which leaves you with a highly provocative thought to consider on your own. If our foundational concepts of God, the soul, and morality evolved directly from the invention of the potter's wheel, animal domestication, and city-states,
What is happening right now?
exactly, what kind of entirely new gods, myths, or religions is our current era of artificial intelligence and global digital networks secretly engineering right now? Are we busy projecting our new, invisible digital realities into the cloud, just as our ancestors projected theirs into the sky? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we will catch you next time.